Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another In Conversations with, presented by Once Club, of course. And today we have the beautiful, amazing Lizzie Mandler. Thank you for joining us, Lizzie. I was really excited to have you come and do this segment with us. So if you've never joined before, please know that we're going to be speaking with Lizzie a little bit about her company, how she started, and specifically about how she makes lasting relationships with personal shoppers to, I suppose, support her business and why that's so special to her. And hopefully towards the end, we will have some time for a little Q&A. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the little Q&A box, and we will definitely get around to your questions towards the end. So hi, Lizzie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure, really. So one of the things I'm most intrigued by is you starting a business at 16. I was still finding myself at 16 and it wasn't going well. It was a whole Alicia Keys phase. So I would love to know how you kind of ended up on this journey of kind of, really becoming so immersive within fine jewellery and kind of knowing that's what you wanted to do.
Yes. So I actually started at 12.
Oh, wow.
I got my ears pierced really late in life. I was really scared of late in life, like late. All my friends had their ears pierced and I was like 12 and didn't have them pierced. I got them pierced. I really was graduating from middle school and I really, really wanted a specific pair of earrings to go with my very lovely, colorful anthropology floral skirt that I was wearing for graduation. And I couldn't find them. And I come from a family of artists. Everyone in my family is very creative. And my mom just kind of said to me, well, why don't we just go to the bead store and you can make them yourself? So that's what really started the whole thing. And I did kind of semi-precious jewelry and beading work from the age of 12 to 16. And then at 16, I saw that there was a fine jewelry school kind of down the street from a store I worked in, a beading store I worked in. And I just wandered in and I took a class, and I remember coming out of the class and calling my dad and saying, like, this is surprise. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And he said to me, I think that that's great, but you need to go to college and then we'll talk about it. So that's kind of, I'm very, very stubborn as a person, like incredibly stubborn. And I think that part of it was like, I had tried a lot of different things. My parents were super, super supportive. I was so lucky in the fact that any little creative venture, any hobby I wanted to try, they supported me in for however, even if it lasted a week and a half. So by the time I got to 16, I had tried so many different things, obviously not adult things, but in the creative space, that something just really resonated with me, and something clicked and I made some sort of decision and then decided to never look back.
Awesome. I love that. That's so exciting. I think it's really nice to kind of know what you want to do, or feel really passionate about something and know that there's a way that you can really explore that and feel that this is like the right path, right? So you did metalsmithing as well, is that right? So how
so at 16
imperative? Sorry, you go.
No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, do you think it's like, I know not all jewelry designers, this is not something that they necessarily have the skill set of. So how was it for you in terms of, did it feel imperative, or was it just kind of, that was your journey?
A little bit of both. So it started as just my journey as like an artist maker. I took this class in fine jewelry making, metalsmithing at 16. And that was the way that I kind of entered into this world, which otherwise I probably at that young wouldn't have entered into, unless it was making things with my own two hands. But then it kind of became as I grew. So I started at 16 and I launched my company at 22. Between the age of 16 and 22, I pursued a career. I pursued a path in metalsmithing, and becoming as good at metalsmithing as I could, knowing that the brand that I wanted to start, I wouldn't probably be making it myself, but that the way that my brain works, being such a visual and tactile person, it doesn't just come out of the air for me. Like, I really have to use my hands and experiment and understand and know the mechanisms. And jewelry has, just like clothing, it has certain limitations. Like, there is a level of comfort. There is, stones don't just get glued in place. You have to understand how they stay in place. So that level of understanding was super important to me. And I still have this rule that like I won't create a design that has any sort of component that I don't know how to do with my own two hands.
Wow.
So in the past, when I've created things that I didn't know how to do, I actually will go back to jewelry school to learn the one technique. It's at this point more of like a principle for me that it's important to me. But it's become really imperative in just my understanding of jewelry and the craft, and also working with craftsmen. I think that a lot of I have such a special bond with my craftsmen because they understand that they can speak to me in their language.
Yeah.
So that's also really important to me.
I think it's really important when you're in any type of industry to kind of have a sense of, like you said, a sense of know-how with the other sort of partners or collaborators that you're working with, because like you said, it really opens up that communication a lot better, and it also supports you in terms of how you can, you know, design that perfect piece. And like you said, you really have the customer in mind when you're making these designs now, because you've actually been able to kind of craft them and know, does that feel comfortable, does that feel wearable, does that, you know, little things like, does it scratch on the skin, because these are such small details that maybe sometimes, you know, if we want to sort of compare it to costume jewelry, that doesn't always necessarily get thought about. And so
Right.
that can be the difference between you wearing something all the time and you not wearing something all the time. So it's so important to kind of hear that. So
Yeah.
I suppose it'd be great to know, for someone who doesn't necessarily know your brand as well, what's the you know, the signature Lizzie Mandler, like what makes Lizzie Mandler Lizzie Mandler?
So, okay, my signature in my whole collection, it runs through about 90% or 95% of the pieces I do, is what's called a knife edge silhouette. So it's a literal triangular silhouette. And I mean, I can, if everyone can kind of see, this is a knife edge ring. So you'll see that there's two sides to it. And when looking at it straight on, you're going to get a little bit of both sides, literally like a triangle with the highest point facing you at eye level.
Amazing.
This silhouette came into play really early. It was like the third piece of jewelry I ever made was a knife edge ring, because my mom had a wedding band that was knife edge and I was always really like in love with it. And then it kind of like really integrates. So like knife edge rings started, and then I also started another signature was like using black and white diamonds together in the same piece, which wasn't really being done. Black diamonds were still like considered super alternative, and I didn't really see a reason why they shouldn't be married together and like not be so in like such a weird, very alternative people wear black diamonds. And I really love the contrast that it created against the gold. So the knife, and you know, and the knife edge allows for these two planes where I could kind of play with them interacting together. And then the knife edge kind of and the black and white kind of really bled itself into the rest of my work. So a lot of my pieces that don't seem to be knife edge, like if you look really closely, there's knife edge detailing. I've really kind of held on to that because I think knife edge does something really interesting. It takes otherwise really simple designs and creates a layer of complexity that allows me to play with them. So not only does it take like a really simple hoop that there's a billion of in the world and make it a little more complex, it also doesn't make it, I never set out on this journey to make things you've never seen before. That wasn't like in my mind, that wasn't my goal. My goal was to make beautiful pieces that people wanted to wear every day. And in my experience, that usually isn't something that you've never seen before. It's like, I wanted to make the jewelry version of your favorite white t-shirt. But how could I do that and it be me? So the knife edge kind of became my way of like layering in this level of complexity and signature into otherwise relatively simple silhouettes. And then visually the knife edge, there's a lot to play with. So because your eye sees first the top edge, it makes pieces look much more delicate than they may be. So you can actually work with like really chunky, heavy gold, but doing it knife edge kind of creates this dimension that wouldn't otherwise be there.
Awesome. I love that. And I think, like you said, I think fine jewelry was always something that was being seen as precious, and now with brands like yours, it is really feeling like it should be able to be worn every day. And I love that kind of concept of kind of like the everyday white t-shirt, because we'll always be forever buying and wearing white t-shirts, or trying to look for the perfect one, right? So it's the same
Right.
kind of thing, which I love. And do you feel that because of, you know, your ethos of kind of finding this complexity in everyday silhouettes and stuff, does that kind of define the type of Lizzie Mandler client, or are you always seeing lots of different versions of your clients? You always seem to be very I was, you know, when I'm on your feed, I always feel like there's that kind of, you know, personal kind of clientele type that always goes through it. It's very, you know, human, and it's always kind of like with the customer in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Lizzie Mandler customer is really interesting. I've never successfully pinpointed a person, and that's kind of the way that it's meant to be. There's two reasons for that. One is because I believe that fine jewelry is for everyone. Like I think that the designs, it's so much less about me and so much more about how my wearer styles that. How does that necklace then become a part of her wardrobe and a part of her language? Like, and that looks very different for a 25-year-old girl as it does for a 65-year-old woman, and it can be the same necklace. And the other reason why I see that I tend to have that range is because I started so young. My collection has literally grown up with me and aged with me and developed and matured with me. So, but I've held on to pieces that I had in the very beginning. So that's been really important to me, was to capture the client at a young age. Like, when jewelry is scary or untouchable or precious, like, I don't believe it should be any of those things. So really, you know, speaking to kind of a really broad range of customer base feels inclusive and nice. And I feel like fine jewelry really is for everyone. So, you know, there's kind of two parts of that story. I really believe in it. And then also just kind of as a natural part of my evolution as a designer.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that you say that, you know, as it's growing with you, because I think a lot of customers, they start that way. In a lot of luxury markets, they tend to, you know, if you're lucky enough to have long lasting relationships, they really do grow with you. And as you're sort of growing as a designer, they're also growing in their own, you know, in their own personal lives. And so you kind of go on that journey with the different pieces of those, I suppose, pillars of, like, you know, important parts of their life and the memories, and it kind of just goes on and on and on. So with regards to with your brand, I know that you're super keen to always work with the sales teams and to really work with personal shoppers or client facing teams, that so they can really resonate, you know, with your brand and sort of, you know, and so they, I suppose, can sell the brand and what have you. How did you kind of, I wouldn't say stumble in this, but why is that so important to you specifically?
So when I was 18, whatever, like my late teens, after I'd started fine jewelry, I actually worked for a fine jewelry retailer here in LA. It was very, very small boutique. There was like 2 employees, and I was mostly in the store by myself. So my only actual work experience other than being a designer is actually selling fine jewelry. And I realized at that point how powerful it was to be the salesperson, that I had at my fingertips like 100 brands, and you wanted a stack ring, I could show you 60 of them, but which ones was I going to show you? And this kind of relationship with the clients and getting to know my clientele, the salespeople really hold all of the power. Like, I kind of entered into the fashion industry, you know, several years later, and started attending Paris Fashion Week and buying appointments and meeting all these big buyers for, you know, and being carried in these large stores, which is amazing. But what I lost was my direct connection with the people that were actually facing my customers. I have a huge custom business, and so I have a lot of interaction with my own customers, and I love that. It's really something that fuels the business. But I have way less access than all of the salespeople that I deal with, who are seeing, like, there's hundreds of them selling my jewelry. To me, salespeople are a gold mine of information. You know, every season going into market, I talk to my buyers about feedback and wanting to understand, what are customers asking for? What are they looking for? Are you hearing certain things? Are people saying certain, like, why isn't that piece working? Or why is this one working really well? I don't design in a bubble. You know, I design for my customers and my stores, and I'm creating a business. So to me, to not take into account that feedback is really short-sighted, and it's always just been really important to me. So in the growth of the business and working with these larger retailers, I've had to kind of make a concerted effort to get direct access to the salespeople. So I do a lot of store visits personally. I spend a lot of time with the salespeople. A lot of them have my direct cell phone number, although I try to do that like a little bit less these days. But like my team's cell phones, like my team knows that for me, it's paramount that you're always available to the salespeople.
Yeah.
That like when a customer asks a question and we get an email about that, like there needs to be an answer within 24 hours at the very most, considering like time zone differences. You know, you guys as personal stylists and salespeople are my eyes into the public that's seeing my jewelry. So that's a really golden and cherished relationship for me.
For sure, it's definitely almost kind of like that first defense vibe. You know, usually the shoppers or the sales teams are the first people to see it before the clients see it, so they're already going to have an idea of who they're going to sell it to or who the customer is, and how to kind of appeal to said customer depending on what the piece is and who they are. And you know, sometimes maybe not the same piece is right for everyone, but there's definitely always a situation where one piece is great for lots of different types. It's just about how they interpret it at the time. So it's always really interesting when you meet a designer like yourself, or even a buying team where they're really invested in the sales team, because in my experience, it's sometimes it's make and break in terms of just the way in which you can sell. Like, speaking from personal experience, some of the clients that I've had who've really locked into brands that I like, or that I've sort of presented to them, is because I've had a really good relationship with the buyer, or had a really great introduction even to that brand for the first time. So, you know, with you sort of being so available, how do you kind of talk with your teams to kind of really convey that Lizzie Mandler message, or is it more about you sort of seeing what they're telling you?
It's a combination of both. I would say, like, you know, when sales teams meet me or when personal shoppers meet me, it's a lot about how I wear the pieces, how I layer them, and them kind of seeing that. Because I think when you meet the designer and you see a full look, like we don't do runway shows, right? So there's no like lookbook of full looks. Like we have lookbook editorial, but it's jewelry, it's hard to capture, it's hard to get a vibe. So I think when you meet a designer, and not just myself, but any fine jewelry designer, and they're head to toe in their own designs, it really is a different perspective. It takes a relatively simple chain and makes it part of a complex look. So I think there's that aspect of it. And then I also think that there's, you know, I obviously get a lot of really useful knowledge from sales teams about what clients are asking for in general. What are they seeing the most of? What's the feedback? Is there price resistance? That I always try and keep in mind. And then above everything else, it's also about having a personal connection. You know, it's really easy, especially I think as someone who did sell fine jewelry, there's so many options. And like, to put a face to a product and a name and a personality to a product and a story behind a collection, it not only gives the salesperson like a toolbox of things to use when selling the collection, but it also creates like an interpersonal connection. And it's so important, I think. It just, you know, personalizing the relationship is also just really important in how the salesperson then goes on to sell it.
Oh, for sure. Because I think how a shopper or a client-facing person resonates with something personally can absolutely change the scope of, you know, who they're talking to and how they do that. And like you said, there are so many options. So how do you kind of start breaking that down and kind of relating it, you know, ideally to one person or the next?
Yeah. And I believe that like the relationship that the personal shopper, that I have with the personal shopper, then that relationship will resonate from the personal shopper or salesperson to the client and how that they present the work. So there's kind of like a ripple effect of making a product really personal.
I completely agree. And I think when you sort of also talk about stories as well, and anecdotes, and kind of, you know, like you said, you get to give a little bit of yourself into that personal shopper and they kind of pass it on. So it really does trickle down and everyone kind of feels like you said, there's a little connection there to, you know, to the brand and to the design and kind of what it means to them. It's super special. You know, you mentioned that sometimes, you're asking more kind of commercial questions, price resistance, design, etc. Is there anything specifically that's ever sort of changed direction for you, where you've really kind of got a lot of feedback on a piece, or a collection where you've decided to kind of pivot, or at least sort of change how you look at the next collection?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily a specific isolated incident, but every season we go into like analysis prior to me designing of kind of like what's working on like a very global level, like what are we seeing as trends on a global level, but then also within different marketplaces. So in the UK, something's working differently than it is in the US or in Japan. And I don't really design around that per se. I kind of have this method of designing where I design like a ton of things and then I like boil it down to the things that come out the way that I like them to. I don't actually design as methodically as this seems. But to me, it's really about planting seeds in my head, and then it then gets kind of passed on to my team where they, push me to do more. They're like, oh, but remember, like the, personal shoppers from this company asked you to do initials, like maybe we should look at some initial options. So it's kind of a back and forth, but I would say that every season there's feedback, a lot of it that we get from like just sales reports, like just looking at sales reports, and then others that we get back from either being in store or communication with our buyers that goes into every collection that I design.
Sure. So it's a little qualitative, a little quantitative.
Exactly.
Together. And I like that it doesn't necessarily kind of, because if you start always changing designs just for the feedback, then you're not really sort of giving a Lizzie Mandler brand, I suppose. But if you kind of are taking it heed, like you said, I suppose it's that growth that your clientele will see and the different demographics will appreciate, so you're always able to kind of grow and move forward, which is, some people do really, really well, and some brands actually really struggle with, funny enough. So it's so important to kind of take both on board.
Yeah, there's such a fine balance between like pretending that you're designing in a bubble only for yourself and not listening to any sort of outside feedback, which I think I did as a very young designer. I think that, there's ego involved, and like you're a designer and like your chest is puffed up and like my designs are mine. But that's all fine and great, but like we also really need to sell our designs. Like I'm a designer, but I'm a designer without a business if I'm not selling anything. So there's kind of a very fine line between kind of heeding the advice and also kind of me taking it where I want to go. I'm pretty stubborn about like if I really want to release a piece, like it gets released no matter what. And if if I haven't sold a single one of a piece, but like I love it, it's definitely staying put. Like I have very strong opinions, but it's a balance. It's really a balance of kind of understanding it and letting, for me, those like little seeds of knowledge then influence like when I go into design season. So it's less about like, I've had 8,000 million requests for an ear cuff and I won't make an ear cuff. I've made them custom for people, but like I've never put an ear cuff in my collection because I know that people are asking for them and I know they're asking for them from me, but I identify that as a trend that's kind of on its way out, and I missed that in the beginning, and therefore like I'm not certainly going to join it now. It's also not a trend that really speaks to me personally, and I really stay away from being like a trend driven collection. Like that's, to me, in fine jewelry, like it's a large investment and it's a forever investment for people. There is a certain amount of weight and respect towards like the materials that we're using and the ancient nature of the craft, and also kind of the emotional connection that people get with fine jewelry, like the occasions which it's given and kind of the emotions people attach to it, that I feel should supersede any and all trends. Yeah. I think that making it trend driven kind of just takes away some of that. So yeah, fine balance.
Absolutely. I think authenticity though is really key there, and I think it would be so easy, right, to do the ear cuff, for example, and it would sell, etc., etc. But if it doesn't feel authentic, and then when you put it out there, if you don't feel good, then it's not. I think also sometimes clients can always know when it's not, you're doing something because.
Yeah.
They're very intuitive sometimes, and actually sometimes that could actually have the opposite effect than what you want it to have, right?
Yep.
So in terms of because you're speaking so much about doing things custom and what have you, is there anything amazing that you've made that you wasn't expecting to, or there's anything that stands out with your custom pieces that you can share with us? Because I'm always absolutely enthralled to I would love to have to do something custom. I don't know what that is yet, but just to kind of go through the process and to be able to kind of, you know, something that's really special. You know, how is it for you with your customers when you do custom?
So a lot of the custom work I do are engagement rings and bridal, which is a very isolated kind of specific process. It's so emotional. It's kind of like, I majored in psychology in college, and I couldn't have picked a better major because there's so much psychology and emotion and kind of counseling involved in the process of engagement rings.
I did psychology as well, so I completely agree with you. I'm like, thank God I did psychology.
In all aspects of sales, I feel like all salespeople should take a course in psychology because it's such a big part of it. But you know, engagement rings are like a very isolated moment of like high intense stress and emotion and a big purchase, usually the biggest purchase someone's made in their lives thus far, and representing a new chapter in their lives. But it's really fun. I mean, listen, like every once in a while, it's really tough. Like I definitely have my days where I'm like ramming my head into a wall because it's just like we're not getting there, or the customer keeps changing their mind. I mean, it's all of the things you can imagine that it would be in that sense. But I've had customers, a lot of them are pretty straightforward, and then I've had customers come to me with like these crazy curveballs of like inspiration and, you know, wanting, like really pushing me outside of my box. And ultimately the pieces I created for them maybe aren't things that I would have created under any other circumstances. But sometimes they're the catalyst to like really push me beyond what I do on a day-to-day basis, which I find really, really challenging and often frustrating, but also I'm really grateful for.
Amazing. And is it usually when you're coming to do these engagement rings, is it usually with the women? Is it like post that they've been engaged and then they do the engagement ring, or is it with the guys first? I'm always intrigued about that because I'm like, do they know? Do they not know? Should they like be, you know? Is it a process from a guy's perspective to be like design the engagement ring?
It's honestly a combination. I deal probably with like, of my couples, maybe 65% are the women are involved in the process. Maybe it's even a little more, maybe it's like 75%. Because I do have quite a few women, like a lot of couples come in together. Or I also on the back end deal a lot with like, we get requests of like from women, like, what is this ring? What are the details? I'm going to pass it along to my boyfriend. So there's like also this like secretive, like detective part that we're the part of the process ahead of time. And then there's the part where like the men are involved, and it's only the man's man or woman, where it's only the significant other's journey, which is also really interesting. That varies hugely. Like it really, like I see such trends in like, depending on what people do for work or how creative they are, or I can usually tell the personality type of the girlfriend by how the boyfriend comes to me and how much information he has already, and you know, all these kind of different things. But it's really a mixed batch how people do engagement rings these days. You know, wedding bands are pretty traditional, the couple comes in together, but engagement rings are kind of all over the board. I also do a lot of resets where we'll take the stone out and we'll make a new setting for them. You know, I firmly believe that like the engagement ring is, and actually a fight that I get into a little bit with my clients, not a fight, but like I get a little testy about it. These rings are for the woman or the person being proposed to. And it's really important to me that that's like, of course, it's a symbol of your love and of your relationship, but I really hate when like ego gets involved on the one side of like, well, but I like it better this way. And I'm like, but it's not on your finger for however many years or the rest of your life. Like this is about her. So you also see that a lot, which is a really interesting personality dynamic. It's quite fascinating, honestly, from a psychology standpoint. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, totally. And I think you make a good point when you're talking about that kind of ego side, because I always think about when the ego starts to get in the way about, oh, they should do this or they should wear that, or I think it should look like this. And I always, you know, you have to think, but if you purchase this and then they don't wear it, that's also going to make you feel bad. So you should also maybe think about what they want to wear every day, because
Yeah.
I would just die. You know, you think all this effort and this thought went into it, which is lovely, and then they're kind of like, oh, you know, and then they don't want to wear it every day. I'd just be so crushed. So I'm like,
Fair
please
point.
save yourself the feelings of just listening to it.
Totally true.
With regards to, you know, back to with your kind of relationships with personal shoppers, in my experience, there are still a lot of brands. I think younger brands for sure are much more open to working with personal shoppers and client facing teams in the way, you know, the way that you've described. However, I think there's still a lot to learn within the industry, in luxury in general. I think kind of getting the idea of being able to reach global audiences sometimes through 3 or 4 personal shoppers rather than traditional channels are sometimes quite overlooked. So would you have any tips in terms of kind of making those relationships with personal shoppers from a brand's perspective?
Just try. I mean, I think that like it's really overlooked. People ask me, so I go to Paris twice a year for Fashion Week, and I usually go to London 2 to 3 times a year attached to those trips. And people ask me why I go to London so often. First of all, I love London, so like leave me alone. I really like it there, and I have a lot of friends there. But second of all, I have 2 of my major retailers in London, and I spend my days in 3 actually, and I spend my days going into their stores, unannounced, completely unannounced. There's always a very awkward moment where like either they recognize me or they don't, or I have to introduce myself, or I'm like just awkwardly stalking the jewelry section. But it's just a concerted effort I put forward. It's really just it's something super important to me, and I think that brands, it's a lot, right? You're opening yourself up to like way more communication. Like you're opening yourself up to a lot of questions, a lot of people asking things from you. I think the simpler method is to just go through the buyer, and it stays really clean, and that's your one point of contact. But I think unfortunately personal shoppers and salespeople can be really intimidated or feel like they can't ask the brand, or like they shouldn't ask those questions. Or I've gotten feedback that some of my stores say like, oh no, she can't do that in another size. And I was like, no one ever said I do everything in all the sizes. Like, of course I can do it in another size. And that's merely like an administrative roadblock. And that makes me really frustrated. So I'm a bit the rebel that like will bypass the buying team and just go straight into the store and like hand out my phone number and email, because there just shouldn't be those roadblocks. I just don't see any reason for it. So I think from a brand perspective, it's really about making an effort. You know, I think that like, how can you, there's an ego portion involved in the sense of like I was saying, designing in a bubble and not really wanting the feedback, but also the sense that like my designs speak for themselves. Like the industry is so saturated. The world is so saturated with things at the moment that I don't know how anyone could stand on that merit of like, it'll sell itself. Nothing sells itself. Like there's someone behind all of the selling. And as a brand, you should be giving them the tools to do their best job at that. So I think that there's a little bit of that. Like some brands don't want to open themselves up to that portion of it, or feel that their work sells themselves. I feel like jewelry is highly, highly saturated, and that makes the connection with the sales team that much more important, because I may be the only gold hoop that the salesperson knows she can email me and ask if there can be a custom size. So yeah, from a brand's perspective, I would say just try.
Yeah, it's so true, because when anytime you are dealing with a customer or a client and they want something so quickly, or they've asked you for advice, you do really kind of go down what you know, and what you know really well, and who you know will essentially work with you, as opposed, you know, especially when the client isn't giving you that much direction, you know, and the people that you always remember are the people that really make an effort to have
Absolutely.
a relationship with you. And I remember something I used to tell my team when I used to work at Threads, and I remember some other girls saying it and be like, you know, we're also dealing with other personal shoppers, and then, you know, they'd be like, oh, this person doesn't reply to me, or this person, and I said, when's the last time you've actually gone to just see them because, or taken them for a coffee or just gone to see what's happening, rather than it always being really transactional. And I said, you know, of course everyone knows it's work based, but I think that there's so much room to kind of actually have real connections. And so when it comes to the next time they're thinking of like a new launch or a new collection, they're much more likely to come to you because you're thinking of them outside of, and it's the same thing with clients as well, right? You know, sometimes my conversations in the past with clients are nothing to do with selling. It's really just about how's your kids, how's your mum? Like, you know, we just talk about non things because it's about always having those relationships, and they start to realize who you are and what they can sort of lean on you for, even from a working relationship perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the age of, not to get like really philosophical with it, but I think in the age of Instagram, where we have this notion that we're personally connected to a million strangers, like I follow people and I feel like I know them and I absolutely do not know them. And I know that that's the case for most people. So in the age of this weird false sense of human connection, nothing substitutes human connection. So it's always like really flattering to me when a salesperson wants to buy a piece of my jewelry, because I know that they have a billion options. And to me, it's really representative of like, I mean, yes, of course, maybe the piece made a really real big impact on them, but oftentimes they're salespeople that I have relationships with. And that to me is like, it's such a massive compliment. And I feel very connected to the salespeople that I've had access with. Like a lot of them that no longer work with stores are now my friends. Like they're just, there's no substitute for human connection. And the way that that trickles out from a business perspective, sure, like I'm there for business, I'm there to sell my brand, but it's also just about making connections. And without kind of, I have great relationships with my buyers and I really cherish them, but why wouldn't I go down another tier to the people that are really facing my customers?
It's, yeah, I completely agree. It's so important. For you, I'm sure 2020 wasn't exactly a picnic in the park, but was there anything that you had to do to really kind of ensure that you guys were, you know, staying really relevant and obviously just continuing to go? Did you pivot, or, you know, was it business as usual? Did you?
So a lot of things happened right before the pandemic hit, like early 2020. I had actually like 3/4 of my team leave. Well, leave and also like me let go of. And I was down to one team member who ironically was my very first employee. And then she left, she worked for me for 5 years, and then left to work for another brand and had come back to work for me. So when pandemic hit, my company had all of a sudden shrunk, and I was in the process of hiring, which I obviously stopped. My company had all of a sudden shrunk down to like the core of like the most efficient, the two of us being like the most highly efficient. And we beautifully, like, it was such a blessing. We beautifully transitioned into working remotely, and her and I have such a history and such a rapport that like it was very natural and easy for us. But I mean, if you ordered something off my website from the time of March to September, I was packing and shipping it in my living room. Everything, like there's no, like, to me, I mean, obviously I have a small, jewelry companies have small teams in general. But at that time I had obviously a very small team. And I don't believe in being like hands off, like nothing is out of realm, especially during a global pandemic. But we were really lucky in that sense. And we were also really lucky that like I had just relaunched my website the year before and like revamped it. So it felt really ready and I could really promote on my website. I was also really lucky that a lot of my stores have really strong personal shoppers that held their sales while the stores were closed, while the brick and mortar was closed. They were selling like crazy because the personal shoppers were making that personal concerted one-on-one effort with their clients. So in that sense, I couldn't be more thankful for the year. And I'm also really thankful for the chance I had to slow down, to not travel, to not go to Paris twice a year, to not do all of these things. It was kind of in a crazy way, like really beautiful in that sense. Despite everything going on globally and all of the horrors of it also. But now we're back to normal and now I'm back on my travel schedule. But so to answer your question, like yes and no, like we pivoted, it was really organic because the company had shrunk and we were able to stay that way all the way until summertime when my actually one employee was going on maternity leave. So then we hired a second. So it was a really like lovely symbiosis from the universe or something that had happened.
Yeah, I heard that a lot, and I talked to a lot of shoppers in different companies, independent, not. And funny enough, the one thing outside of sweats and loungewear that was selling well was actually fine jewelry, and I heard that
Yeah.
across the board. It was one thing I suppose people could feel that they could invest in. And like you said, if you had a really great personal shopper, they could really bring that to life for you and kind of do what they normally do, even though it was remotely. But I think fine jewelry really had a, considering that it was a tough year, were doing really, really well. And I can sort of see why, because I think when, you have these pieces forever, whereas sometimes with the ready to wear, once the season changes, you're kind of over it. But with the jewelry, it's all the time, and it kind of makes you feel a certain way when you wear it, or what you remember of. So it's really cool.
I mean, us shoppers like to shop, so like we had to satiate that somewhere, and I think like we all admitted we weren't leaving our houses for a year, so there's no need to buy anything relevant at the moment because that was going to be irrelevant by the time we came out. So in a lot of ways, I think that like fine jewelry really flourished because it filled that hole for people, and it also gave people like something meaningful to buy, and an investment piece, and again something they could wear. It doesn't matter what season they bought it in.
Absolutely, completely. So before we get to our Q&A question, if we do have any questions coming up, do you have sort of what's next now for Lizzie Mandler for 2021? Do you have anything exciting coming out, or that you want to tell us about? I
don't know. What's next? We're doing a very big trade show in the end of August called Couture. So all of my attention is now focused on that and kind of creating our most cohesive kind of new launch to date. It's really important to me to show up to this trade show in the best way possible. So I'm really focused on design at the moment and kind of expanding things that are doing well and creating newness, and really like zeroing in on like a concerted ready to buy bridal, which we again haven't really had. So we also launched men's last year, but we launched men's in kind of my chains were always meant to be unisex, so it was really easy for me to like just recategorize them and market them towards men, and that was great for some learning, for a bit of a learning curve to understand how it was selling. And now we're kind of really taking a look at men's and filling it out as a mini capsule collection. So that's kind of also in the works. Maybe you'll see some home items from me. I don't know yet. I can't promise, but something that I'm passionate about. So we'll see how many of the things I can get done.
We'll see, right? Let's see how busy you are. I love the homes thing, because that's another thing that I saw kind of come out as well out of the pandemic. Everyone's very much about the homeware now and the interior. Yep. Myself included. I've adopted like 7 plants. I'm like, it's aesthetic. It's a thing, right? So all of them about the homeware. So that will be really interesting. We have a couple of questions. One being, you were talking about sort of designing like loads of pieces. So how many pieces would you typically design for a next collection or release of pieces?
I usually design, so I usually release between 12 and 30 SKUs, which is kind of a lot. And then there's probably like a graveyard of like 20 that didn't get fully developed, didn't make it on time, didn't work out as an idea. So I almost design double of what I release.
Okay, cool. Like doing music, there's lots of songs that you don't hear and then they get the album.
Yeah, there's like a lot of white noise. It's like, it's, being a designer, like nothing, it doesn't come out perfectly, or like, a lot of things don't come out how I envision them. And unfortunately, usually I get up against the deadline of it needing to be released. So I have to like drop it if I can't figure it out, but then I try and pick it up the next season. So it's kind of an ever evolving process.
Cool. And another question we have is, how do you feel about, because mixing metals, obviously you do like the black and white diamonds, but do you have any thoughts on mixing metals like silver, gold, white gold, rose gold?
So I exclusively wear yellow. It's like I'm full yellow gold head to toe. So I don't personally mix metals, but that being said, my feeling on it is pretty much like anything else in fashion. I don't really believe that certain people should or shouldn't wear styles based on their body type or anything. If you like something, choose to wear it, but you have to really own that you're wearing it. So if you like mixed metals, own it, like wear it in full and do it to the fullest extent, and it will look good. It's really more about the way that you wear it than like, and the intent behind it. Like do it intentionally, mix all of your things. I think it's great. I think personal style is such an opportunity for people to be creative and express who they are. So yeah, so I, that's my feeling on it. I don't personally do it. I make mixed metal pieces. Obviously there's like a great price point incentive when you're working with silver also. But my feeling and what I tell my clients when they're asking me like, can I pull this off? I hate that question. Of course you can pull it off. Do you want to pull it off? Just pull it off. Like wear the piece. You're going to look great. Like if you believe it, you'll look great. So that's kind of how I also advise my clients.
I agree, and I can absolutely tell you now that you've said you used to work in retail, so I can absolutely tell, because I'm the same. I'm like, there's no rules. Do what you like. Honestly, even though as a person who advises other people, I'm always like, if you love it, please do it. It doesn't matter what I think. And like you said, conviction is everything.
Everything. It's all about attitude.
You know, oh, for sure. Like if that's how you want to feel in the day, and you want to do sequins, mixed metals, just do it. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we've come to the time, and it's been amazing talking with you and learning more about your brand and you know, your ethos and how you work. It's been fantastic. Hopefully I'll see you in London sometime, maybe.
Yes, hopefully before the end of the year. Let's see.
Hopefully. But thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful. And if any of our members have any more questions for Lizzie, we'll be happy to pass those on and get those answered for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.